Alright boomers, here we are again. Up first, we have stat allocation. Back in ye olden days, aka before 2017, you didn't automatically skill up after leveling. You had to manually spend your attribute points like an old school RPG, and you could choose to invest in any of the main stats. Because this allowed you to make mistakes and say, be a suspiciously strong white mage, the devs had to remove it. It was also a pain for arcanists who played both Scholar and Summoner, as the stat points were technically tied to class, not job, so they would have to buy a little book that let them respec every time they wanted to swap. Number 2 is the highly requested cross-classing. Many graybeards in the last video lamented the absence of this one, and honestly for good reason. I just got lazy and cut it. But it was a huge part of the game's history, so now I'll give it some proper treatment. Cross-classing has always been a part of Final Fantasy. Sub-jobbing in games like Tactics, FF5, and of course FF11 was huge. 14's own take was a little half-baked, but it was still cool. Today's role actions are the watered-down remnants of this system. Back then, when you leveled a class up, certain abilities would be unlocked for you to use in a semi-global pool. Not every ability could be cross-classed, and not every class could use every eligible ability. This was muddied even more by the fact that equipping a job stone further limited your options and cross-class slots. The real death knell here, though, was what we might call the meta. Some cross-class skills were just funny, like Paladin could take Raise, but they couldn't use it in combat. Others, however, were simply non-negotiable. Swiftcast, today a basic role action for all healers and casters, was then a level 26 Thaumaturge ability. Even today, most people despise leveling and playing Black Mage, but back then when leveling was all around slower and Black Mage more boring, this was a pretty big demand. If you wanted to be a serious player though, you couldn't show up to content as a white mage without Swiftcast. Black Mage wasn't spared either though, because while Swiftcast might have been native, the meta also dictated that they had to level Archer to get Raging Strikes, a significant DPS boost, and Quelling Strikes to manage their enmity, which was much more important back then. Now, I've specified Black Mage and Archer here for another reason. Besides getting these special cross-class abilities, you simply could not unlock BLM without having Archer leveled, literally. Not only were your cross-class skills important, but jobs had subclass requirements, and Black Mage happened to be level 30 Thaumaturge and level 15 Archer. Only after satisfying your subclass requirement could you then undertake the quest chain to unlock your actual job. For number 3, we're going to dwell on Archer a bit longer and talk about Bard. Today, Bard is the red-headed stepchild of Fizz Ranged. They're not quite selfish DPS like Machinist, but they're also not the party support gods that Dancers are. This is a fitting legacy, because Square had no idea what the fuck they were doing back then either. Before Heavensward, Bard was the only Fizz Ranged, and it was a lot different from today. However, I want to zoom in on specifically its limit break, which was not the Varus E arrow spam that they have now, but a literal copy-paste of White Mage's healer LB3. Weird system. Moving on to number 4, let's talk about healers now. Today, every healer has pretty much the same damage template. A single target cast, a single target dot, an AoE cast, and then some minor flavor of special damage like White Mage's Assize or Sage's Phlegma. This was not always the case. Before Shadowbringers, Scholar and Old Summoner shared a lot of common tools owing to their common Arcanist ancestry. Scholar, a healer, had things like Shadow Flare and an AoE dot spread. The big healer DPS spell was the cross-class Cleric stance, which went through 2 iterations. Originally, it swapped your intelligence and mind stats, further buffed your damage and nerfed your heals, and locked you out of swapping back for 5 seconds. They tried to simplify this stance dancing in Stormblood by making Cleric stance a flat 5% damage increase on a 90-second cooldown, essentially just turning it into a generic buff, but finally gutted it entirely in 5.0. While we're in the neighborhood, we can also hit number 5, mana pools. If you're a new player, you may wonder why you have like 100 health but 10,000 MP at level 1. This too is a Shadowbringers change, as before 5.0, your mana pool scaled with Piety. Today, Piety still exists, but it simply affects MP regen. This is also why Ethers stopped getting new additions. Other pots are long beyond their super era, but because MP is now simply a flat 10k, they just froze Ethers in time. And speaking of old stats, number 6 was not spared by Yoshida's Scythe, accuracy. As the name implies, this stat determined the hit rate of your spells and abilities, essentially allowing you to miss attacks. It was technically just a flat attribute you had on gear, materia, and food like anything else, but there was all kinds of complicated math around accuracy caps in A Realm Reborn and Heavensward. The stat was more or less removed in Stormblood, and while it's still technically dormant in the game files, players effectively can't miss anymore. As such, the stat was transformed into today's direct hit, a type of mini crit that replaced accuracy on any item that had it. And finally, to close out, number 7 is much more recent, the removal of the Old Feast. PvP is probably one of the most reworked features in this game, and yet it is so perennially neglected by the player base. The current Crystal Conflict stuff is, to Square's credit, one of the better, if not best, iterations that has ever existed, but the feast died so it could live. Teams of 4 were thrown into an arena and basically just TDM'd. When you died, you dropped a pouch of coins, and if the enemy collected them, it contributed toward their final score. If one team collected enough coins, without dropping their own and getting looted, of course, then the match finished. It was not a great format, but I can't help but wonder how it would have played with today's better PvP design. Having it at least as an alternative to CC would be fun. Anyways, all the Feast sold ranked rewards, like the Wolf Collar weapons, are now simply available to everyone on a vendor, so it seems like Square has wiped its hands of the mode. Thank you always for your support of this channel. Your chocobos that I took hostage a few months ago are doing well, but if you would like visitation rights, subscribe to me and click on this damn video.